Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of 51 Stories of Emotional Wellbeing with Emotional Ability Resources. Today, I have with me the bright and dynamic Emmy Fortin, who is a breakup coach. Have you ever heard of this term? When I first heard of the term, I was so fascinated. So, welcome to the show, Emmy. It's so wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
So I wanted you to tell me a little bit about yourself. So how did Emmy behave when she was growing up? Who was Emmy while growing up?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that because I actually had such a great, fun childhood. That later in my life, when I started to have like relationship struggles and, struggles within myself, a lot of people in the personal development space always tell you, well, go back to your childhood and, see if anything has happened there. And I would rack my brain being like, I had a great childhood. Where would anything stem? And it was through really kind of picking apart that experience that I came to realize a few things. One, I was that, a kind of overachiever where, I always wanted to get A's. I always studied, way later than I should. I was always like a very good, child, well behaved. And in I went to a very rigorous and challenging elementary school, and I was always the youngest in my class, sometimes even full year younger than my peers. And as much as I tried and studied, it just always seemed like my peers would do just a little bit better than me.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think what I've realized is that feeling of always having to be striving for more, or maybe even going a step further to say like I'm not good enough or as good as them, right? um could have ended up playing out in future relationships, future situations. Because when you have that feeling I'm not enough, then you end up seeking someone else to have filled that for you.
I think that was so well put, Emmy, because a lot of times we are in a culture which celebrates achievement. And what we don't realize is the price that we pay with our mental health and emotional well being, because we never feel good enough. And thank you so much for being candid about it, because this opens up everybody's eyes on the fact that you are who you are. How does it matter? It's not a rat race. And tell me a little bit about your book. I mean, the title is fascinating. Who is your red dress? And like I shared with you, when I heard the title, I was like, wow, probably it's just going to be, about a pick me up. But when I heard you speak, and it was so amazing, tell me a little bit about your book and how did you develop an emotional strength and what made you write the book?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for coming to my talk. I loved seeing you there and having you there. Yeah, and so I think kind of building on your question of your childhood, I had kind of a dichotomous life almost because at school I felt that insane pressure. But at home I was very like free and risk taking and very much willing to kind of step outside of my comfort zone. And so I think those two kind of versions of me stayed with me throughout my life and appear in my book. So the title is Who is Your Red Dress? And it's one woman's quest to break up with a love addiction. So what happened is I fell in love with salsa dancing. And in that scene, I met a man. Now, this relationship ended up being what I call a situationship, which there's no clear defined, title, expectations. It's very confusing. And so it became a toxic cycle for me. So I was constantly chasing these highs with this person, but then also experiencing intense lows whenever we would crash and break up with each other, which was repeated over the course of 6 years. So I think the element of, and I was also a high school teacher for 16 years. So I think that element of like, good girl role model played out in my professional life, but then like, wild child risk taker showed up in, the salsa life and the adventurous traveling life, the choices I was making with my dating circumstances. So I think all of that is really closely intertwined. And the red dress is really just a symbol of how something can feel and look very tantalizing and lure you in, while at the same time also feeling very stifling and making you feel not authentic in who you are, and kind of wanting to take it off, but then being stuck in that cycle.
I think that's so well put, because a lot of us, we look at the color red as something which picks us up, and that, wow, I need to feel good. And so beautifully you've brought it out as a metaphor for something which is toxic for you, but yet you engage in it because it gives you that instant high. And tell us a little bit more about yourself as a person. Any challenges that you have overcome in your personal life that you feel make you who you are today?
Yes, I would. Huge challenges. Thank you for asking that. I have always been someone who does not like making decisions. Okay, very indecisive. I mean, going to the nail salon and picking a color is just like uber stressful, right? So I think for a lot of my life, I kind of outsourced my decision making. I would, look to other people to kind of tell me what to do. Even my, relationship partner, it was always like, well, whatever you want to do. And so that led to what I say now to my own clients, and how I kind of shifted the way I live my life now is you create your entire life relationships from either action or inaction. It's one of the two. And so for me, indecision was inaction. And so all of these life scenarios were happening. And you just like, you're wondering why. Why is this happening? Why am I in this relationship? Why does this guy not want to, be faithful to me? Whatever. But what I think is the most important to realize is that we create most of our life circumstances. We may not realize it. So now I even though I still struggle with decision making, I still make it a point to make sure that I am sourcing inward to make the decisions that are best for me in my life, and the people in my life, rather than constantly seeking out.
I think that's a beautiful realization for someone so young. Can you elaborate a little bit more on it? What is it that makes us doubt ourselves so much?
Yeah, I think there could be a lot of things. And I think our life experience and the environment that shapes us has a lot to do with that. But it could also be, related to our innate personality characteristics as well. Um, in my case, I'm kind of theorizing here that, being in a high achievement environment, you kind of, when you raise your hand, like you need to be right. And so in that case, decision making becomes stressful, right? So um
I think what you said about, when is it that you stopped feeling the pressure of your environment? You had just shared with me that you were a high school teacher. Tell us a little bit about that phase of your life. How did you balance salsa with your high school teaching? Tell us a little bit more about that. That is so exotic and different. Like you said, it's like two sides of you, literally, like daytime and nighttime. Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, and I would not say it was a healthy two sides of the coin. And you said, how did you balance it? I would say I didn't do a good job of balancing it. I was very like kind of tired and stressed in my daytime job, and then I would kind of blow off that steam either at night or on the weekends, and that created a actually an imbalance. um which, led to a lot of choices that weren't really supportive of where I wanted to be and who I wanted to be. So I think a very important point for me was when I took a solo trip to Spain for 3 weeks, having never been out of the country or traveled by myself. I decided I was going to just dive right in and I was going to figure it all out. And I think that's when I really started to trust my own decision-making processes, that I could make choices and figure it all out. And I didn't have to rely on anyone else to do that. I only had myself.
So basically, getting out of your comfort zone is what made you the decision maker in your own life, right?
Yeah, and even like the beginning scene of that chapter, right, of the flying solo in Spain chapter, I make reference to the fact that everything up until that point had been decided for me, right? Like my plane ticket, I'm going from point A to point B, what seat I was sitting in, people to tell you which cab to take after you get off the plane. But after that, everything else was totally up to me.
That's wonderful. You call yourself a breakup coach. So, from a high school biology teacher to a breakup coach, how interesting has the journey been? And what exactly is a breakup coach?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I taught high school bio for 16 years, and I am so grateful for that experience. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with the students. I love, biology in general. And I think that because the relationship I was having was so impactful to me as a human, I just started feeling this pull to do something else. And I felt like almost like my time as a high school teacher it was time to just move on. I wanted to help people in a different way. I wanted to help people who were suffering from broken hearts, who felt really, really stuck in their situation, who felt maybe broken. I wanted to make sure that I could help them feel connected, supported, which is why I wrote the book. I want anyone to read it who has been through any of that to read it and feel seen and understood and feel like they're not alone. And that morphed into starting the business as a breakup coach, which now I help people both one-on-one and in a group setting to reconnect with themselves, rebuild on a personal level so they can attract the fulfilling relationships they want in the future. We work a lot on getting really clear and accepting yourself and understanding yourself so that you can build those steps to kind of get what you want.
I think that's wonderful. And who has been your role model?
I've had many role models, I would say, throughout my life. I I can't say that I have one person in particular, but I have looked to other women who seem to have a very strong sense of self. I've always admired any woman who knows what she wants and how she is in the world and is not insecure about presenting that and maintaining it. So for example, in my life and in some of my clients' lives, we tend to maybe feel fearful or insecure about expressing boundaries, right? Or maybe our needs or if something is bothering us. But why not be able to feel that sense of confidence and self-acceptance to express and speak our truth, in a way that aligns with how we want to live?
I think that's wonderful. And any movies or any books that really, really have touched your heart or transformed you?
Yeah, I'm an avid reader for sure. And I tend to, over the past bunch of years, I've tend to lean very much toward the self-help types of books. And when I was very first kind of starting out, I was reading books like You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero and Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, all these things about energy, manifesting, getting connected with yourself to attract what you want. Those have been a key part of my process. And I would say the most recent ones are things along the lines of, how to deepen your relationships and also just come into like acceptance of yourself in more ways than one.
Thank you for sharing that, Emmy. And any tips that you want to give our viewers today that you feel would help them?
I usually do suggest a bunch of books. Actually, one book that I found really interesting was called The Hoffman Process by Tim Lawrence. And it really gets you to dig deep into your relationship with your parents and your life as a child, and to just start getting curious about where you may have picked things up or even absorbed things, that you might not be aware of. And it can bring a lot of understanding to why you are the way you are. And I can't overlook a gift that you gave to me, which is your book. I actually really enjoy, if I were to suggest to anybody, I really enjoy the poetry that you've generously gifted us in your book called Musings.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's one poem in particular called Love Me As I Am. And I think that you just nicely tell us about how we can't have the illusion of perfection in a relationship. That was a big piece for me too, was realizing that the story, the narrative that I had in my head was not in alignment with what the reality of what was actually happening in my life. And so it was coming to terms with that. That was very challenging, but also liberating.
I think what you really have brought out, Emmy, is that vulnerability is our key out of most of the challenges that we go through. Am I understanding you clearly, or anything else that you want to tell me? You've been vulnerable, and I think that has probably transformed you. And how is it that you view your journey today? If I ask
Yeah,
you back,
vulnerability has been huge. It was a really big decision for me to actually publish the book because, you've read it and it's really a lot of details. It's honest. It's a lot. And writing the book has been so cathartic for me to be able to share and release my story. And that's what it is. It's just my story, my experience, my perception, right? But it allows you to use your voice and allows you to express. And I think that vulnerability is also a key to forgiving yourself. A lot of times we can abandon ourselves in situations, and it's oftentimes harder to forgive ourselves for that than even someone else abandoning us.
so how did you forgive yourself? Because this is one point where many of the people who I see struggle with, my clients, students, people who watch us, because while we still can forgive others, forgiving ourselves is a very difficult journey that most people shy away from embarking on. Can you tell us a little bit more about what did you do precisely to forgive yourself? Perhaps some daily activities or whatever you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a process. One thing that I think was important is through the writing, I gained a lot more understanding of myself and the choices I was making. And it was important to distinguish, rather than thinking about it as, I did something wrong, I am a bad person, is really more about these are the choices that I made at a time where I was very overwhelmed and stressed. And it's not to use it as an excuse, but to kind of give yourself some grace and say, I was doing the best that I could at that moment in my life with the skills that I had. And, my ex or anyone else in my life was also doing the best that they could do at that point in their life. And it gives you a little bit of grace to be able to say, okay, that was where I was at that point. I am in the process of progressing, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life. So I think forgiveness requires you to be a little bit gentle and reframe how you see your past life situations.
I think that's so beautifully put. And also, I love the fact how candid you have been about the multiple relationships you've had, you know. They stretch on to many, many of them, and most people try to camouflage it. But you've been very open about it, is how you always try and look at yourself through the other person, through the people you are dating. Where would it lead to? And, you know, sometimes you made choices which you were not comfortable with. Today, how do you look at relationships? What is your take to relationships? How do you approach relationships?
Yeah. And I think being open about all of those relationships is what helped me to reframe my thinking around, these are choices that I had made. Um, there's lots of people in the world that do that too. Like, why should I chastise myself anymore than, someone else? And it was a piece that allowed me to accept that piece of myself. And so now that, I've experienced all of that, I know what it feels like, I know what I did. I took some energy and time and space to get really clear about what I did want in a relationship, clearly mapped all that out, spent some time embodying that energy, and I feel I called that partner into my life. So, I do view relationships differently now as, my boyfriend and I would call each other life partner, because I think it's easy for us to get caught up in expecting our partner to like fulfill all of our needs, when really we need to look at it from more of a partnership of how are we able to support each other in this life together and have open communication around that without, placing like huge expectations on that other person.
Yep. I think that was very well put in a nutshell. So, would you like to read a little bit from your book, which you feel would help people experience emotional well being or which would touch hearts? I absolutely loved
Uh,
the title and I loved your book. So, I would love it if you share something with our viewers today.
what did you suggest? You want to experience what? Emotional well-being?
Yes, any part, you know, where you feel that will help people experience emotional well-being, or perhaps talks about your vulnerability. Anything that you want to share with our viewers is good.
Yeah. Um, hmm. I hadn't thought about a reading before our interview, so I apologize. Taking a few minutes. Um, I could read just these couple of paragraphs. I do think one of the most important things is to find ourselves. And when I say find, I mean reconnect and really learn who you are at a deep level. A lot of my clients tell me that they feel lost when a relationship ends, and I know I felt lost as well. So it really comes down to getting to know yourself. And so on that first day that I went to Spain, I ventured out of, this new apartment that I had just put my things in, and I was going to be, walking through new areas, my first time venturing out and really needing to take that leap and trust myself, right? And I did end up getting lost, but then I found my way again. And at the end of the day, when I made it back to my apartment, these are some of the things that I was thinking. As I climbed the final stairs leading to rest in my apartment, I felt satisfaction in my core. I was intensely proud of how I had accomplished something that others may find insignificant or basic knowledge, but to me was like reaching the summit of a mountain. I felt more confident about the places I'd have to find next, the first being my language school. Tomorrow, I'll learn how to take the metro, I decided. I studied the Madrid metro map, plotting out exactly which route I'd need to take and which streets I'd have to walk to find my school once I left the metro station. Um, I'll read just a couple more sentences. After washing up, I lay in bed on my back, but facing the opposite way, with my feet resting on the wall above the headboard to reduce the swelling. Thoughts swirled around my head as I reflected on my adventurous day. I realized this was how I was going to put the shattered pieces of myself back together, one foot in front of the other, one personal triumph at a time. Today, I had leapt into the unknown and trusted myself more than I ever had, probably in my whole life. I knew I had taken the first steps closer to what I would continue to learn and closer to the woman I wanted to become. The woman I am when I'm both lost and incredibly present in unison when dancing. But today, I wondered if I already was that woman I wanted to be when dancing and that I just didn't realize it yet.
That was wonderful, and it was so beautiful, you know. It describes your journey very, very well and beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So, as we end,
Thank you.
if there was one word or one sentence to describe you, what would you use for yourself?
I would say less of a description of myself and more of like my superpower is understanding how someone is feeling at like a root level and helping them express that. Um, and I choose that because those are the kind of experiences I enjoy as well. Like if I'm going to go do activities, like I want to connect with people
Mhm.
on this deep, deep level. So I hope that I can be as open to that connection for other people to sense as well.
Thank you. That was wonderful, and it has indeed been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your questions.